Okay, let's get started here. I'm gonna turn down the lights a little bit. Okay, so obviously today we're gonna continue and I think get done with religious theories. I really hope so, because we are, coming up to the midterm pretty closely here. So before we kind of do that, I said that I would talk to you a little bit about the midterm today, and then Wednesday, basically the whole class is set aside for two things, right? Basically, I didn't know that door could open. I thought it was locked all the time. What miracle is this? It's a superhuman power that has done it. Uh, or the janitor. I don't know which one. Okay, so Wednesday's class, assuming we get done everything today, if we have a little bit of content left, we'll start with that. Second part will be Q&A, like if you have any questions, and then I will go over some practice questions with you. So this morning, I posted some practice questions on the e-class, and these are extremely representative of what you're going to see on the exam. And what I'll say is that there's basically 4 types of questions on the exam. So I don't know, I can't use this board because there's 17 tables in front of it. I love this room. It's so lovely. Okay, so really simply, right, we've had basically, our topics, right? So we've had, what is religion? So definitions of religion, right? So in there, you're going to have your, functional, your substantive, and your social constructivist definitions, and Smith's definition, right? So you could get a question on any of these and what these questions kind of might look like, and you'll see that in the question that I posted on eClass is something to the effect of, hey, here's a definition that someone gave of religion. Categorize it. Which one does it fit into and why, right? You could also get aspects of Smith's definition, right? So like, why does Smith use superhuman powers, right? Why does he use that instead of supernatural, right? And, explain what it is, explain what he means by superhuman powers, and why he thinks that's important to his definition. So that's kind of one set of questions. Okay, the next one is, how religion works. Okay. And the big thing here is those 10 categories that Smith has of, how religion affects society. I forget the exact term that he uses off the top of my head, but there's those 10. So this is what the question will look like. It'll look exactly like the one that's in the practice questions. It's, explain. What is it called? Now, see, I have to look it up. Causal mechanism. Explain causal mechanism 1. And give an example, and it has to be not from the course. So for each of these causal mechanisms, you're going to have to think of and it's totally random, right? On that question, it's completely random which one you get. Basically, I have a question on each of them. You get a random one. So you got to be ready with, understand the causal mechanism, like each of them, and have an example ready not from the course. Okay, so that's that whole category. The third one is theories of religion, right? So the things that we're doing today, and that'll be like explain this theory of religion, right? And you might be asked to like explain an aspect of it. You might be asked to explain what Stark means by a free market or a religious monopoly, and you give an example. Probably those ones from the course are fine. Okay, example. So theories, explain, and example. And again, this is open book, right? So you can prep all this stuff in advance. The last category is case study. Yay, case study. Case study where basically I give you a fictional scenario. It's like, hey, we have this kind of religious organization, and it'll be like, okay, the case study and which theory explains this or best explains this and why. Okay? So which theory explains it and why? Okay, so that's 4 questions. So you're going to get absolutely 1 question from each of these categories. And the last question is a wild card, where eClass will randomly select a second question from one of these categories, right? So so you could get 2 on what is religion, you could get 2 on how religion works, or theories, or 2 case studies, right? And it's going to be completely random. And all of these, right? There's a bunch of questions in here. I think there's 6 questions there, 10 questions here, maybe 8 questions here, and then 5 case studies. So you could be sitting next to someone and, if you're being all clever and being like, haha, I will work with someone, there's a really good chance you're not going to get the 5 same questions. So it might not help you. These have all been tested for ChatGPT, by the way, by me. And ChatGPT has no idea what you're talking about because its knowledge apparently isn't this deep. I tried this. It's completely confused and it gives garbage, gibberish answers. These ones is pretty bad. It doesn't really get what you're talking about. And then the case studies is just like blah, 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 goobly, goobly, goobly. Nothing that I would consider a reasonable answer at all. Anyway, so these have been pretty thoroughly tested for ChatGPT. So I would say don't bother with ChatGPT because I've tried to craft the questions in such a way as it's going to have no idea what I'm talking about. And it hasn't read Smith's book, to be honest. So I don't know why. Maybe ChatGPT has yet to absorb all the knowledge in the world. Yeah, please.
When you say not from the first, you also mean like not from the next.
Yes, so not something that I don't want you to give me back exactly the example that I gave you. It's meant to make you think a little bit, right? Which is why I'm giving you a whole week to kind of look at them and be like, I don't know. I need to think about this. Yeah, please.
But it can be from the not required readings.
So can you copy Smith's examples?
Or can you use the ones that he uses?
No, I want you to come up with it on your own. Yeah, because I want you to think come up with your own examples. That's what I want. It's not to regurgitate. It's to think where do I see this in the world, right? I know sociology is all about regurgitation half the time, but yeah, please.
So the only one that we have to come up with our own is this stuff, how religion works.
Yes. I will double check on the theories. I will double check the questions. I didn't read all of them through, but mostly they're just, explain an example. And if there's any, I will edit them and I will let you know well in advance if I lied to you. But yeah, I wrote them last year, so I don't remember them all. But yeah, please.
Also for the practice question, does it click on the internet number one practice quiz that says that the questions haven't been added yet?
Oh, did I forget to hit? I may have forgot. Hang on. I may have forgotten to hit save. That happens to me sometimes. Okay, let's take a look. I might have forgotten to hit actually add the questions in. I meant to, and then it didn't happen. Okay. I also usually have 22 windows open with 72 tabs each, so that's what happens. Let me fix that. Okay. Yeah, I must have forgot to hit save. And add questions from question bank. Practice? Oh, that didn't. I hate, by the way, I just want you to know how much I hate. Oh, there they are. I'm like, where are they? There they are. Okay. Add them all. Checkity, 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 checkity. Add selected questions. There you go. And save. and then they will appear. Okay, and they're each going to be marked out of 10, but I'm not going to change that right now. There you go. See, now you can do it. Ta-da. I fixed it. Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think there was another question somewhere. Someone did, I didn't. Yeah.
What's the time?
You have 60 minutes. So 12 minutes per question, which should be lots of time. All right. Yeah.
You want like a paragraph or
A paragraph, a couple paragraphs. So someone asked me this in an email. I haven't answered your email. I'm very sorry. Life is chaotic. Monday morning is like troll through email to get everything from like Thursday to Monday. I don't have a word limit or like a minimum word amount. Basically, it's like when you feel like you've answered the question, stop. The reason I don't want to put a word kind of limit on it is specifically because one thing happens is people write a great 400 word answer. And if I say 500 words, people write 100 more words, wasting their time, wasting their time and my time reading 100 extra words. And there's 90 of you and I teach 4 classes and I have a lot of marking. So every precious minute is great. When you feel like you're done answering the question, just stop, right? And there is no like, you know what? If it took you 150 words, I find that very doubtful. But if that's where you're at and you don't know what else to say, just stop. I mean, some people like to do the knowledge dump where it's just like, I'm going to type everything I know, and that's okay. You can do that. But if you're, feel like you've been very efficient, you've answered it in 300 words, you can stop at that. You don't have to be like, but Professor Brassard said 500 words. Will he dock me for 499? I'm not going to count. So I know that students sometimes don't love ambiguity, but that's where I'm at. All right, other questions, because I do want to jump into content. All right, and we'll come back Wednesday. We're going to do the review. We're going to go over those questions, and I'll talk you through each of them in turn, the practice questions, not the ones that are going to be on the test. And I'll do like Q&A, and you guys can ask any questions you would like to ask. All right, let's go back to sociological theories. And if I can find where my mouse ended up. Hello. Ah, there you are. There you are, my friend. Okay, so this is where we ended off on Friday. Basically, we're talking about rational choice theory, right? So rational choice theory, this theory that Stark comes up with, basically to try and explain how religion kind of works, like what is its operational mechanism, why do people choose it? And he says, right, basically people, choose kind of religion in general because it offers compensators, right? Things that people want that aren't available to them in this life. I was thinking about this over the weekend a little bit, and I think the difference, say, from deprivation theory and Marx, the big one is that some of these things are not available to anyone, right? Whereas like whether you're rich or not, eternal life is not available to you. So some of the things that people want out of religion are universal in their sort of appeal, right? Which is why rich people are religious as well. I mean, I guess in the Marxian sense, rich people wouldn't be religious at all. Okay, so, basically religious compensators, I said are basically things that religion promises in place of worldly goods that are not available. So, things like, everybody wants prosperity, but not everybody can have it. Everybody wants power, not everyone can have it. And people want things that are not available at all, like eternal life and seeing dead relatives. Religion says, I can give you those things, but it's going to take a while. You're going to have to live this very, long process, and do all of the right things, in a sense, in order to achieve that. So the promise is far off, which is where it has certain risks, advantages and risks. It can offer huge rewards that aren't plausibly available from other sources, but you can't know for certain if you're going to get it. So it really needs a strong kind of structuring system around it, supports so that people have a sense that they might get these things. It's established through social interactions, right? So people basically see other people being religious, and they're like, oh, I like those people. Those people are good. It's less risky and more valuable when there's credible evidence that participation in the religion has some benefits, right, that aren't explainable naturally, right? And yeah, testimonials and other people's kind of accounts of how that religion has changed their life is important for establishing its value, right? Whether that's parents or members of a community or whatever, right? People react to testimonials and other people saying, this is what I get out of my religion. And again, it comes, it's more reliable when it comes from a trusted source that has little to gain. And religious leaders, especially that have little to gain, tend to be more trusted. Okay, and that's I think where we ended off. Okay, so religious economies. Religious economies is a sort of other theory from Stark. So Stark, will go through many iterations of kind of theories of religion. Starts with rational choice theory, and then eventually that sort of morphs into what are called market theories of religion, or religious economies. So religious economies, basically, he writes this with a bunch of other people, William Bainbridge, and this particular person, I can't remember Iacone's first name. I think they're all named John. I'm going to go with John. I can't remember. Lawrence. It's Lawrence Iannacone. I was not even close to John. Okay. So Lawrence Iannacone, and Iannacone is an economist, right? So Stark, again, he's very heterodox, and which is what I love about Stark, is he'll grab bag ideas from all over the place to try and figure out how religion works. Okay, so basically what Stark says with regards to religious economies is that in a given society, a given society basically is a marketplace, right? A marketplace of ideas. The religious economy consists of all of the religious activity that goes on in a particular society. And from Stark's perspective, basically every person is a potential customer for religion, right? They may adopt a religion and practice a religion, or they may not. Like any person, maybe an Apple customer, right? You might buy an iPhone, you might not buy an iPhone. Same thing, right? You might be a Catholic, you might not be a Catholic. You might become Muslim, you might not become Muslim, right? And basically, what he says is much like an economy, there are different religious groups in most religious economies that are basically offering, he calls them religious firms, and they're offering basically religious product lines. Sometimes they're very similar, other times they're very different, right? You might have all sorts of religious firms offering different kinds of religious products. Okay, now one of the things that why Stark came up with this theory and why he kind of turns to economics is because what he says is we've always focused in terms of sociology of religion on understanding, and even, you can see rational choice theory very much as a kind of demand side, right? What we think religion offers people, right? What we think the product is that people might want to consume, to more of a supply side, under what conditions can religious firms create demand, right? What is it about certain religions that leads them to grow as compared to other ones, right? Why do some die off? Why are some societies marked by low religious demand and others are marked by high religious demand? Okay, and I will say, do I say this on the next slide? I maybe don't. But one of the big questions that Stark is trying to solve is why the United States is so much more religious than Europe, right? This is a key question that he has. The US is a complete outlier in terms of religion. Even today, I don't have the chart here, but I could show you, like, we see all of the kind of developed economies, like, way down, low religious demand, and the US is, like, way up here. Like, income's high, but demand for religion remains pretty high. And Stark is like, why is that? Like, why is Europe so irreligious? And why is America so religious in comparison, even given its high level of development? Okay, so what basically Stark comes up with is the idea that there are two kinds of religious markets that you can have. There are religious free markets, where basically there's little regulation on religious activity, and there are religious monopolies, where there are high levels of restriction on religious activity, right? Where basically the state typically has set up one religion as its favorite, and all other religions are either banned or their ability to compete in the religious marketplace is severely curtailed, right? So when you have religious monopolies, there tends to be relatively low religious demand. Whereas if you have a religious free market, right, an unregulated economy, you tend to have much more demand for religion, right? And you tend to have, okay, so basically if you have a monopoly, you tend to have kind of one product line. I see your question, I'll get to you in half a second. You tend to have one religious product line. If you have a relatively free market, you can have numerous, very pluralistic in terms of religious product lines. Yeah, please.
But wouldn't you say, especially now, like the U.S. is wants to be very Christianity oriented, especially in politics, and that, like, especially since 9/11, all that, like, Muslim religion and stuff is very much looked down upon over there. Yet there's still such a high demand for religion.
Okay, that's a very good question. The way he's thinking of this kind of pluralism is more like, okay, if I wanted to go start a church tomorrow, I could do that, right? Like let's say, I could do it in Canada. If I was in the US, right, I could go start a church, and if I want to have, a wacky water slide, baptism, or whatever, great example, right? So
Purely legal, almost.
it's almost more like not thinking about religion as like blocks like Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. It's more like within Christianity in the US, there's a lot of diversity. Whereas if you went to Germany, you've got Catholic, Lutheran. That's it, right? Those are the two officially set up state churches, and that's kind of all you got. Yeah, please.
So is the U.S. the free market or the relative monopoly?
The US is the free market, right? Because, there's no limitation on if I want to start, the Church of Jeffrey Broussard of Latter-day Saints. There's no regulation on that at all, right? Whereas if I wanted to do that in Europe, can't do it. It's actually much more difficult, even to this day. So it's been historically, Europe had every country had one established state church, and everywhere else, or every other religion was banned or kind of put down, right? Think of the Catholic kind of Anglican wars in England. Yeah, please.
So basically, if we're using the U.S. as an example, the reason why they have high religiousness is because they have so many choices, so everyone can participate in a religion. I call it them. Well, in Europe, it's like, well, if I'm not A or B, I'm just kind of here, or you're so used to A and B being there that it's like you kind of just forget it's there.
Precisely. Yeah. So basically, you can, and I see your question, Maya, as well. You can have, in the US, there's so many different kind of variations on even just say Christianity that you can find a version of Christianity that fits you. If you want, traditional Latin Mass, there's a church for you. If you want a rock concert with light Christian content, there's a mega church out there with your name on it, right? One that has an excellent childcare program so that you can have an hour off from your kids, that's available too. Whereas say in Germany, it's like, yeah, are you Catholic or Lutheran? I'm like, I actually don't find either of those choices particularly appealing, so I'm just gonna stay home on Sunday morning. Maya, what was your question?
So is that why we see a lot of new Christian movements and a lot of cults coming from the States?
Yeah, absolutely.
No regulations.
That's absolutely it, right? And that's why Mormonism fundamentally could emerge from the context of the United States and not from other places, because it was so free market that basically you could have that kind of springing up, and the state didn't intervene directly for a long time. Yeah. Okay.
Where would the line be, since, at one point, does it almost, make religion degrade, the name of religion, where it's there's so many movements that it's it's almost no longer, really religious anymore because of how, spun out it's been?
I mean, I don't think so. Maybe. but I think it's like fast food, right? Or food restaurants in general. Are there ever too many
Fast food,
restaurants,
yeah.
right? Is there ever like too many restaurants? I mean, there certainly are too many Tim Hortons, but um, is it ever like when you're looking for something to eat on a Friday night, are you ever like, man, I really wish I had less selection, right? I guess that's kind of how Stark would look at it. Okay, go ahead, and then
So, do you mean that it's a free market and that you can be any religion under Christianity, or you can be just any
well,
religion?
theoretically, you could be any religion, right? In the sense that the state doesn't have an officially selected religion that it says this is the one we prefer, and we're gonna basically oppress every other one, right? There are Jews in the U.S. There are Muslims, there are Hindus, and they don't officially face any state sanction. It's not like we're not going to allow the building of any mosques, right? People might not like it, but it's still permitted under the law. Yeah.
Just wondering, because I know we're primarily using the US as an example. Canada would also be considered free market, correct?
Yeah. Although, I mean, historically, Canada really only had two major churches. It was basically the United Church and the Catholic Church, and that was like 85% of the religious activity. So Canada has never really had as vibrant a kind of evangelical or other Protestant movements. And so some of the differences in Canada and the US, I think, are probably explained by that.
So in terms like, because I like to hope we're a developed nation, how do we rank in terms of like religion?
We're closer to Europe, although still more religious than Europe, but less religious than the United States. Yeah. Yeah, a middle child, but kind of closer to our older brother in Europe. Considerably less religious than the U.S. Yeah,
How
please.
would you explain a country like France in particular for its kind of shifting away from you're allowed to follow a church that they set out and just instead saying you have to only practice religion privately?
You're thinking of la laicité, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Stark's explanation is that France was a religious monopoly, right? It was Catholic. Only church that was allowed was Catholic, and basically it failed to appeal to people, which opened up the door for secularism, right? That basically there was such a mass of people that were like, yeah, Catholic, likey, that it was just like, well, they didn't actually attend. And we'll talk about this. I think when we talk about, I can't remember what unit I talk about this in. I remember I do talk about this at some point. Secularization. That's next after the exam. That particular kind of example of Europe versus America. Yeah, please.
Sorry, what was the definition for like markets ruled by a monopoly? I know pluralistic was open markets.
Yeah, so basically where the state sets up one particular religion that is permitted, one or two, maybe a small selection, and all others are either actively suppressed or, more like in Germany, passively suppressed. Like if you want to start a new church in Germany, you can't register as a charity, for example. So everything would be for profit.
Is that just called a monopoly market?
Yeah, that's just a religious monopoly. Yeah.
How can you explain like the emergence of a religious free market, like in the United States?
It's a sort of historical accident, right? Like for whatever reason in the US Constitution, they set up this idea that, I guess coming out of the religious wars of Europe, right? And they set it up so that it's like, yeah, the state is not going to officially prefer one religion, right? And it's, what is it? Is it in the First Amendment? I can't remember if it's the first or second. But yeah, basically that Congress shall make no law abridging freedom or establishing a church. I can't remember the exact wording, but it's right there in the early passages of the Constitution. And it just sort of sets it up so the state can't pick and choose. It's just like, yeah, religious, whatever you want to be. Yeah, please.
I know there's one, I forget, it might be France too, where it's like, our version of freedom of religion is that you can practice any religion. I think that's the same thing as for them. It's like freedom of religion means freedom from religion, where it is like you have to practice it at home. You can't have any like headscarves or crosses or anything. Like you have to be neutral.
Yeah, it's official secularism on the level of the state. Yeah, and it's conceived very differently in Canada, the U.S., and some places in Europe, where it's like, secularism here means the state doesn't have an official religion. There, it's like the state can't present any religious symbols at all.
Would that kind of count as a religious monopoly though? They're like, no, nothing is allowed.
I mean, I think, I don't know, actually. I got to think about that one. Why don't we come back to that when we talk about secularization? Because I do want to keep going. Though I love your questions. I just want to say they're great questions. Time is short. Okay. So, religious regulation and monopolies, he says, create lethargic religions, right? We're basically, and we'll talk about this when we talk about secularization. One of the things that Stark says is that religions that are supported by the state often get lazy, right? If you're the German Catholic or German Lutheran Church and basically the state collects taxes on your behalf and then distributes it out to you, the clergy doesn't feel any great need to go and find people or make that religion very appealing because it's like, well, I got my paycheck, whether I do a good job as a preacher or not. Whereas in the US, no official state support. It's like, man, if I'm going to feed myself and if I'm going to need more followers to give me donations, which means I better get out there and pound the pavement and make this an appealing religious product, right? Now, people don't actually think like that, but there is this sort of like, what do we do to get people in the door, right? Because otherwise, this thing is not going to be sustainable. We're not going to have salaries. In those older kind of state-supported religions, it's like, we don't care. And I mean, even to the point where at one point, the official Lutheran church in Sweden, I believe, was being run by an atheist, receiving state support from the Swedish state that collects taxes based on, or for the Lutheran church there. Okay. And what Stark says is because it's been religious monopolies all the way down, Europe has been lethargic religiously for a long time. Even, and this will surprise you, but we'll talk about it later when we talk about secularization, going back into the Middle Ages. One of the things that he'll contend is that Europe was never as religious as we tend to think it was. I know, I have like a million questions, but I must move on. And we'll talk about it later, I promise. The US, having never had a state religion, has meant that all these religions had to, these little groups had to vie for followers, and therefore each of them sort of has to position itself in relatively unique spaces, offering product lines that are appealing to people, which has meant much more religious vitality. It's more likely that a person in the US can find a religious group that is going to exactly match what they might want out of religion, right? Because there are so many on offer. I think it's like 50,000 different kind of denominations in the US of churches, and then like non-denominational is just like all over the place. Add Muslims and you've got a lot. Yeah, please. So whatever they're like, is it a worship service that's in Latin, right? That would be a religious product. Is it like super traditional, or is it like, Hillsong Church where they have a rock band playing, upbeat religious tunes, and offering, a prosperity gospel, right? That would be a different religious product, right? So they're different, just like whatever you're offering as a church or a mosque or a synagogue, that is your religious product, the whole line. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Yeah, I think I got everything on the slide. American religious pluralism is what allows, say, Mormonism to go from a kooky new religious movement to, basically probably one of the world's newest major religions. And have this explosive growth of about 40% per decade for, about 100 years. Okay. So, so rational choice theorists and market theorists, right? And you think of them as a continuum because, Stark kind of builds this idea, well, what does religion offer? Compensators, what are those? In some senses, they're products. Basically, religious pluralism fosters religious vitality. More and more religious consumers are inducted or induced into participating by the variety of religious products that satisfy their needs and wants, right? So that is basically what a religious product line is. The example I gave, the restaurant example, right? So basically, a market versus a monopoly. A single fast food chain will only attract people who like that particular kind of food. say burgers, and everybody else will not go. But multiple fast food chains will create a bigger market for fast food, right? So if you've got your Popeyes, your KFC, your Pizza Hut, your McDonald's, your Subways, right? More people are actively going to consume fast food than they would if you just had McDonald's, right? Because not everybody is going to want McDonald's. And so he says basically Europe is like the single fast food chain, right? Where each country has its, Catholic church or Lutheran church or whatever. And America is much more like a varied market with no regulation. Having just recently spent a lot of time in America, there really is no fast food regulation. It's kind of gross. Yeah, please.
Just wondering, so like let's say you go over to Germany and you want to start a new religion and you want to bring over a religion, how would they suppress it? Would they just be like, either the government would be like, well, we're not going to count it as a religion, you got to treat this more like a business, or B, the people would just be like, no, I'm either this or that, why would I need something else?
So there's a bunch of different ways that, say, Germany has historically limited new churches. One of them is, they don't allow them to register as charities. So it's treated like a business, right? So any income you raise is taxed, which can be really difficult for religious groups, right? The other one is they might not grant them building licenses, right? So you can't even get a business license to convert a part of a strip mall into a new church, right? Or certainly to build a new church, it could be very difficult in Germany because they're like, well, you're not a church, right? We have this, which is the Catholic Church, and this, which is the Lutheran Church. It's also, in a sense, the fact that the church is always state supported has built a mentality into a lot of Germans that you don't give money to a church, right? That basically there is no financial support for churches that comes from the people. It's like, well, the state should be supporting churches. That's how it works. So new churches that come in have a hard time raising money. Yeah, Maya.
I can speak to this a little bit. So, like, when my church ministers go to other countries, they can't say that they're going for church reasons because the church, you can't build up a church. So, in order to get visas and stuff, they have to apply for work visas and teach English and whatnot.
Right.
They can't be funded. Then any income is taxed as a regular person because they're not working as a church employee. There's no founded church.
Right. Yeah. So basically, it just sort of suppresses it from like quasi-legal means. Yeah. Okay. I must move on again. I have like 7 slides left to go. 7 slides, 12 minutes. We can do this. Okay. Thomas Luckman. So Thomas Luckman was sort of a friend of Bella and Parsons. And he collaborated. Oh, and he worked with Berger, right? He co-wrote Social Construction of Reality. And he was interested in what he called the rise of invisible religion. And basically he said, that what was going to happen as we entered modernity was that the symbolic universes would kind of break down, right? So yeah, he said, like Berger, right? Individuals make life meaningful through various meaning systems and worldviews, symbolic universes. He said you can think of them as being religious because they transcend the subjective, right? So they're more than just people's consciousness. It's like I have a worldview, and that is, a kind of religious thing. So he would have included things like Marxism into religion, which I think is wrong. And functionally, religion, he said, is present in non-specific forms in all societies and socialized individuals, right? So whether you're religious or not, you're part of a religious system that's shared by that society because he's defining it so broadly, right? Any kind of worldview. Now he says some kinds of religions are more developed than others, and the ones that we're most familiar with are the ones that are historically institutionalized and have, institutionalized their symbolic universes, right? They're characterized by institutional specialization. The church does one thing, and it has, practitioners, pastors, priests, imams, anyone who's like a religious specialist that kind of runs the thing, and they have clear doctrines and social organizations and specializations, right? And that can vary, to a great degree, right? If you have the Catholic Church, right, you have that whole hierarchy I showed you last time, and then you have monks and nuns and all sorts of things on there as well. And then if you took some less structured religious groups, you might not have that depth of organization. but they all have, social organization. They have doctrines, like rules that they follow, and kind of specialists. Okay. And yeah, they used to offer symbolic universes to society, but now he says that these are being superseded by what he calls individualized forms of religion. Religion that basically, do I have another Luckman slide? I do, yes, okay. I thought I had 3 Luckman slides. I'm glad. But yeah, increasingly, basically people start to put their own religions together, right? So yeah, in modernity, there's more competing institutions than there were in the past, right? The church or the mosque or the synagogue used to be the center of community, and that's where people accessed all of their services. Now there are more competing institutions. We've gone through differentiation, right? So the school system, at least in theory, medical system, social welfare system are all separated from religion. And there's lots, there's psychology, psychiatry, and all of these things that people can now turn to. And yeah, many of the kind of institutions of the secular state, today are more present in people's lives than they were in the past, right? And they have taken the place of religion in a lot of cases. Okay, so he thinks official religion has now been pushed into entirely the private sphere. But in modernity, the themes of self-realization, autonomy, and personal development have become the central themes. And this is, something that's a point that's also made by a psychologist named Philip Reith, who talked about this as, he calls it the triumph of the therapeutic, right? That post-1960s culture especially has become all about self-realization, right? And people doing kind of therapy on themselves. So religion, he says, can speak to those needs, but it now competes with other discourses. And religion is increasingly having trouble keeping up with the shifting needs and desires of the population because it has a kind of set of doctrines that was built in the past. And those things are kind of changing. Now, what people actually need in modernity is changing all the time, and religion has a tough time keeping up.
Did you say that this is a byproduct of the free market?
I'd care not to speculate on that. I think so, right? But I think it's also for Luckman, it's more about pluralism, right? Is there's so many sources of ideas now in society that people will all of a sudden become aware of a need they have that they didn't know they had, right? And that this, essentially keeps things moving at a pace that religion has a tough time keeping up with. Okay. So what does he say happens, right? Basically, people now get to sort of decide on their own symbolic universe, right? They get to sort of build it. Religions are just one discourse among many. And people, when they're choosing, they can choose a more kind of built out kind of system of thought, right? So you can have Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Marxism, or cobble together their own from available discourses. We call this is called syncretism. That's the official word. We'll talk about this again when we talk about youth and religion, because one of the pieces of research that I find really interesting came from a group called Springtide Institute. And one of the things that they found was that Gen Z especially are doing what they call faith unbundled. So they're basically taking a bunch of available cultural material and cobbling it into their own religious views that are very not structured. But we'll talk about that more when we get to youth and religion. And he says this kind of religion is invisible because it doesn't take concrete institutional form. Okay, so what does this look like in principle, right? You go on Amazon and you kind of want to be spiritual, so you buy some tarot. That's not me. You buy some tarot cards, you buy some Reiki crystals, you buy a statue of the Buddha, and a prayer mat, and you kind of combine these things into your own specific, unique religious or spiritual practice, right? And so what Luckman says is, yeah, this is what happens with modernity. Religious individualism is modernity's overarching theme. And especially when you combine it with consumerism, right? Religion and religious items become items to be consumed. And when you combine it with Amazon, you get one-day shipping. So you can combine them very quickly. Okay. All right, this one's easy. One of the other big kind of theories, basically, it's called sheltered enclave theory. It says that religions, especially traditional Orthodox religions, survive and prosper where they're sheltered from modernity, right? So basically, it assumes, it's a sort of secularization theory, that religions can't thrive in the context of modernity, and says like, successful religions have low social engagement. They set themselves away from society and keep themselves somewhat isolated. So they have high distinction, right? They're very distinct members of this particular group, and low cultural engagement, right? So they don't mix with the overarching culture. All right, so easy examples of this, the Amish, right, are probably your best and easiest example, right? Because they shun modern technology, they kind of keep to themselves, they live in tight communities. I actually ran into the Amish apparently when I was in Montana, and I was like, oh, cool. I was like, there's an ice cream shop run by the Amish, and I'm like, is this like a costume? Are they wearing Amish costumes? But no, they were actually Amish. It was interesting. American fundamentalist Protestants in some ways are this as well, right? They cut themselves off, especially from pop culture, and sort of created their own pop culture away from mainstream pop culture, sort of to isolate themselves from some of those negative cultural influences, or what they perceived as negative cultural influences. All right, sheltered enclave theory is easy. Strictness theory. Okay, in a nutshell, and these are kind of the short and extra theories. Strictness theory, of whom Rodney Stark is not an advocate, but I like this quote, which is why I put it there. Basically says that religions with strict rules that exclude all non-orthodox positions are going to do better, especially in modernity, than others. So what do they look like? They demand high engagement, right? So they need everybody to be deeply engaged. They exclude what are called free riders, right? So people who might come to consume the services offered by religious communities, but add very little. Strict religious communities are going to insist that everyone be involved in some way. So they generate a lot of social benefit. The more people you have putting in, the more social benefit you're going to get out of a religious group. So if you insist that people be involved, you're going to generate a lot of religious goods. So those communities are going to look very attractive and do very well. So strict religions tend to have very few free riders because they kick free riders out, right? Or they force free riders to do stuff. And if your idea is, I'm going to go in there for a free meal, and then you're asked to pastor the children's ministry, you're going to be out the door pretty quick because you were just in it for a potluck at the end. And therefore, what they'll say is that strict religions tend to do better, but they police insiders and outsiders very closely, right? They're very strict about keeping insiders and outsiders marked off. So the insiders are the people who believe what we believe and act like we act, and the outsiders are not. Okay. All right, I'm going to do status discontent theory because it's also easy, and then on Wednesday we're going to do subcultural theory of religious strength. It's a little bit more complicated. I don't quite have the time, but I can do status discontent. So we'll have one slide of new content on Wednesday, and that'll be it. Okay, I blame all of you for asking such delightful questions. Trying to think. Mormonism is probably a good example of strictness theory in a lot of ways, right? Because it insists that things like you have to go on your 2-year mission, right? In order to be and it's very tightly policed in terms of what people believe, or at least it has traditionally. It's loosening up a little bit. But yeah, Mormons would be a good example of that. Okay, do I have time, or is that clock fast? No, it's good. Okay, actually, you know what? I don't want to rush. We'll have 2 slides on Wednesday. I can do 2 slides in 10 minutes, then Q&A, and then review some questions. We'll have lots of time. It'll be good. All right, so we'll cover status discontent and subcultural theory of religious strength on Wednesday. I would have made it if not for your questions, which I would like you to keep asking. Alrighty. Hello. Yeah.
So, in terms of generating our own